Hello again, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this Monday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. Up first, we've got breakup map for the 18th of May, and breakup over along the Yukon River now, with even down to the mouth showing mostly open. And for the Kobuk River, areas of mostly open, but farther upstream, it's only areas that are partially open, and then still mostly ice on down toward the coast. And for the Noatak River, it looks like mostly open, with a couple areas there still showing with some open, having a little more ice, and then right down to the mouth of the river, still mostly ice. And as for the Colville, mostly ice. The Kaparik River, there on the north slope, mostly ice, as well as the Sagwan. Temperatures staying in the 20s, so making breakup on those rivers kind of hard to do for a while longer. So going on to what we have, 24-hour precipitation chart here, showing a little bit falling on the western Alaska range there, and some precip getting up toward the Kenai Peninsula today, and also up over the Valdez area. They picked up about 1/10 of an inch of rain along with some fog during the day today. Heaviest down around Kodiak Island of about 1/2 inch at the state airport there, and even heavier amounts on the upslope areas of the Aleutian Range there, with wetting rains across, well, 1/4 of an inch, which is a wetting rain, 1/2 inch being a soaking rain. That occurred at King Salmon today. That was actually just a 12-hour amount, while Port Hayden had about 4/10 of an inch, and roughly around 1500s at Dillingham. And that, you can see the interior pretty dry, and some areas are pretty breezy. So fire danger on the high side, even though it isn't particularly hot up there, but definitely dry and breezy. And we'll see on the fire danger for grasses, quite an extensive area, very high fire danger for the grasses as it has been, especially north of the Alaska Range, eastward, all the way out into the Yukon Delta, just about all of the Seward Peninsula today, and the Kobuk, Noatak valleys. And looks like around the greater Fairbanks area, it's extreme for grasses, as well as an extreme area there in the lower elevations of the Copper River Basin. Scattered areas there just west of Fairbanks over toward Tanana, actually. And that's for grass, and that's usually got the highest. So taking a look at fire danger for spruce, still kind of an extreme area there southwest of Fairbanks, otherwise just very high along the north side of the Alaska Range. And also some extreme, very high fire danger for spruce, Copper River Basin, again, the lower elevations, as well as the Susitna Valley, with high fire danger, Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet, northern Cook Inlet, Matanuska Valley, Anchorage, so northern Kuskokwim Valley, and then back into very high up over the Yukon Flats, with high fire danger for spruce up to the northwest there. I'm not sure how widespread spruce trees are up there, but still kind of high, and it's been breezy over the interior today. That's one of the reasons fire danger is a little elevated, higher than it would be if there wasn't much wind. So going on to satellite imagery, I can see a band of clouds. That's a frontal boundary pushing eastward there. Looks like something of a wave forming over Kodiak Island, kind of, or actually a low is developing there near Kodiak and southwest of Kodiak Island. Front pushing moisture up, rain getting into Seldovia and Homer, just a few hundredths of an inch so far, with the heavier rain, as I mentioned, back down toward Kodiak and into the Bristol Bay area, especially the upslope areas of the Aleutian Range, and moisture sliding on up into Prince William Sound there to Valdez. Otherwise, southern southeast coast, not too bad today, looking mostly sunny, and maybe a few more clouds, mid and high level clouds increasing along the north coast of the Panhandle, mostly sunny in the interior. Also some breezy conditions. Indian Mountain seeing winds out of the east-northeast gusting 35 miles an hour, while eastern Arctic coast easterlies at 20 to 30 miles an hour. Windier, though, on the west side, as they have been all weekend and through today as well, with 25, 35 mile an hour wind gusts from Point Hope up to Point Lay. Lighter winds on the central coast with generally cloudy skies. Could be some flurries there over the western north slope, but the Arctic coast itself really not even reporting any fog, just clouds, and a lot of clouds over the Bering Sea with that low just north of Atka Island. And we've got showers over the Fox Islands westward to light rain at Adak, and also the Pribilof Island areas. Looking at the chart today, is that low, actually low center in Bristol Bay, and a trough down across Kodiak Island, just south of the frontal boundary there, with the rain up into the North Gulf Coast and on the increase with the Kenai Peninsula. Gusty winds occurring. We're seeing winds gust to 35 miles an hour at Portage, as well as Palmer. East-northeast winds there in the Matanuska Valley, pretty gusty at Palmer Airport. They had a peak wind gust of 35 miles per hour. Otherwise, showers there from Nunivak Island and the Pribilofs, a more extensive area just south of that low center with a trough with light rain, fog, and drizzle from Adak to Atka, and a little more in the showery nature over toward Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. A few showers out toward Shemya, and some flurries possible, nothing significant over the north slope. Generally, mostly marginal or VFR kind of day for the Arctic coast, fog free for the most part. Next system on the southwest corner of the chart there will push a pretty good shot of wind and rain. Small craft advisory winds into the central Aleutians tonight. Wind and rain westward to Shemya and Attu. Look for a break ahead of that system with lighter winds, dry conditions, maybe some clearing moving into Unmak Island, possibly the Pribilofs, but a trough keeps it damp from that low over the southwest interior, especially the Kuskokwim Delta down into northeast Bristol Bay, continued wet and cloudy. Winds are light, though, not much gradient around that low center. Look for rain changing to showers, tapering off Kodiak Island, but I wouldn't look for much clearing. And periods of rain for the Kenai Peninsula and North Gulf Coast areas. And that spreads into the Panhandle now. Finally, some moisture moving in, especially along the coast and to the north, taking a little longer down south. And still breezy over the northern interior, as you can see, tighter gradient, especially over toward the Eagle area, and then slackening off for the North Slope and Arctic coast. So look for some possible areas of fog. Flurries again possible on the upslope areas of the western North Slope, but continued partly cloudy from the northwest coast to around Point Lay or so. Possible fog bearing straight to St. Lawrence Island. And for the outlook Tuesday, less wind up over the interior, still a little breezy, but nothing less than what you had today. And for the interior, it looks like showers scattered along a trough axis in the central interior there, near the Alaska range, with a better chance farther to the south central Alaska. Clouds definitely mostly cloudy, showers becoming a little more widespread over the Kenai Peninsula area. And light rain or showers on the North Gulf Coast on eastward and then down the Panhandle, with showers, rain, fog, and drizzle for the Alaska Peninsula. And that gradient expands eastward slowly, so pretty windy, wet day for the Adak-Atka area. Not so much for the Pribilofs, maybe some clearing there, still too far to the northeast. And taking a look at the outlook for Wednesday, that front advances eastward and weakens, but holds together enough for pretty gusty winds for the Alaska Peninsula. Could see gusts 35 like Cold Bay, one of the normally windier areas in this pattern, with rain pushing into most of Bristol Bay, definitely across the areas from Togiak Bay and the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. Showers northward to the Nulato Hills, eastward into the interior. Now, chance of thunderstorms over the upper Tanana Valley 40-mile country from the eastern Alaska Range to just south of Eagle, and showers mostly over the southern Panhandle. Low temperatures for tonight, 15 to lower 20s. Arctic coast, North Slope once again in the 30s south of the Brooks Range, maybe some lower 40s, definitely in the lower to mid 40s for the area from the Kuskokwim Valley area on out to the deltas, then back into the 30s along the coast, upper 20s St. Lawrence Island, and mid to upper 40s for the Panhandle. They'll be followed by highs in the 50s, lower to mid for the southeast coast, as well as Yakutat, just 51 for your high tomorrow, and 55 to 60, 61 or 2 possible, so Sitna Valley and maybe the Kenai Peninsula, otherwise mostly in the 50s, lower 50s Kodiak, and lower 60s for the west central interior and the Seward Peninsula, highs in the 20s for the North Slope and the Arctic coast, and then for the lows, dropping back down to 15 to 20, 21, 22 degrees for that area, north of the Brooks Range. South of the mountains there, back into the 30s, mid-30s to lower 40s for the central interior areas. lower 40s south central Alaska, near 40 along the coast, and mid to upper 40s for the Panhandle, followed by highs Wednesday afternoon, 60 to 65 in the interior, upper 50s to lower 60s south central Alaska, upper 20s along the Arctic coast, and mid to upper 50s for the Panhandle.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
All right, first line weather graphic. Tuesday morning, IFR North Slope Arctic coast up into the central Brooks Range there, and the Tuvik-Adigan passes, for example, and VFR south of the mountains, all the way down to the Alaska Range, and some VFR for Cook Inlet. Manuscus is sitting in the valley surrounded by marginal VFR with IFR up into Prince William Sound, North Gulf Coast, right along the coast of the Panhandle. Another band of IFR there from southwest Kodiak Island, across the Aleutian Range, Bristol Bay, and Togiak Bay along the southwest coast, Nunivak Island, and then to just south of St. Matthew Island, and yet another batch of IFR over the central western Aleutians. For the afternoon, that area pushes northward and eastward, spreading to possibly as far east as Nikolsky by late afternoon, leaving Adak-Atka in the IFR zone. And IFR now, Cape Newinam, Togiak Bay, into the Auckland Mountains. Otherwise, marginal VFR for Bristol Bay, into the Kuskokwim Valley, southern Cook Inlet, marginal. Kodiak Island, marginal VFR. IFR holding, but reduced a little bit there, but still covering Prince William Sound and the North Gulf Coast. Into the northern Panhandle now with the southeast coast, marginal VFR with areas of IFR. Interior looking good, Cook Inlet, northern central Cook Inlet, northward, or say Anchor Point on up into the interior, marginal VFR for the North Slope and Arctic coast. And for Wednesday, some marginal VFR developing through the Bering Strait to the north coast, St. Lawrence Island. IFR once again redevelops, low clouds, fog, maybe some flurries for the North Slope and Arctic coast to the Brooks Range. VFR south of the mountains, southern Alaska, and southwest Alaska, especially from Norton Sound all the way down to Bristol Bay, marginal VFR. IFR, eastern Aleutians to the Pribilofs, wrapping back around to Shimei and Attu, and some IFR over the eastern Copper River Basin from the Wrangell Mountains to the eastern North Gulf Coast, marginal for the Panhandle. And the afternoon, not bad, North Slope becoming VFR as well as most of the Arctic coast. Marginal VFR along the west coast with IFR along the Yukon Delta, Nunivak Island to near St. Paul, over St. Matthew Island, back to the west. And southern Bering Sea Aleutians marginal, some IFR south coast of the Alaska Peninsula. And now a little bit better for the Prince William Sound area. Marginal VFR diminishing throughout the day. That'll extend on down the southeast coast. Anatuvik, IFR, northern entrance, especially early on. Otherwise, marginal VFR at times throughout the day on Tuesday. Same forecast for Adigan. And Lake Clark, Merrill, marginal VFR at times. And look for kind of a marginal type of day for rainy as well. Windy, though, VFR. As will be Isabel, Mentasta, both VFR tomorrow, and Tanita also will be VFR. Portage, marginal VFR, IFR pretty likely, especially on the eastern entrance, eastern approach, Chilkoot and White, starting out marginal, deteriorating to IFR into the afternoon. And for the freezing levels, 2,000 feet still up there between Point Ley and Cape Lisburne, about 6,000 feet over the west central interior, back down to 4,000 feet. Southern and southwest Alaska to the Pribilof, 6,000 to 8,000 feet off the southeast coast. Icing with the front pushing into the Aleutians. Areas of considerable moderate there, Adak and Atka, along and just in advance of the frontal boundary. Otherwise, it's quite an extensive area of isolated moderate rime or mixed icing. Mixed icing likely up over southern Alaska, with the main area along the North Gulf Coast and Panhandle. Looking at the jet stream. Several upper level lows from Wrangell Island into the northwest coast, and then the other one just right over Kodiak Island, associated with the moisture coming up into the North Gulf Coast and Panhandle with that southwest flow at about 50 knots about across the southern southeast coast. And taking a look at 9,000 feet, main low, at least the biggest one, out south of the western Aleutians. So look for some 45 knot winds to come in there between Amchitka and Adak. And light winds over the northern eastern Bering Sea with a couple of weak lows, one near the Fognak Island area and another one centered just about over Cape Newenham. Yet another upper level low is pulling pulling west-southwest, parks itself near Shishmaref with easterly flow for the western Arctic coast. And about the same pattern at 3,000 feet. So moving on to turbulence, occasional moderate chop below 6,000 feet from Adak eastward to Nikolsky, and also up along the Brooks Range. Light to isolated moderate chop below 4.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
The Space Weather Prediction Center has had a long-standing relationship with the power industry, so they've been aware that solar storms, the geomagnetic storm piece of that, can affect the operation of their systems and induce extra currents and loads on those systems that can either trip those systems offline or in the worst of cases cause damage. That relationship goes back for several decades. In fact, a big incident in 1989 where part of Quebec was tripped offline that affected something like 6 million customers for about 9 hours. I think that really raised the awareness in the power industries.
When we get the alert, we watch the grid and start looking for issues. Are we seeing a decline in voltage? Are we seeing equipment failures? And we readjust the system to try to mitigate those problems, try to keep the lights on and keep it from going out.
Averaging about 500, 550 kilometers per second.
If we didn't have this early warning, we wouldn't see it until our sensor saw it. Getting more information quicker and faster before the storm hits, not during the storm, is a big improvement.
In the long term, I think what we need and what we're moving toward, the U.S. as a whole, is better modeling, fully understanding this phenomenon, understanding how it would impact specific systems.
Rather than actually experiencing a storm, we can simulate storms in our software and see what the impact is. We try to get ahead of it. We always plan that if there's an outage, how can we keep the lights on? What's the best process to prevent it?
In the end, 5-10 years from now, there's going to be a whole mix of operational procedures driven by what we do on prediction and warning. And then there also will probably be some level of hardware controls to ensure the reliability of the grid.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
There's different types of impacts on communication systems, and the HF we call the high frequency, which is that band of communications 3 to 30 megahertz. But it's a very important band of radio communication because it's used widespread. It's used, for example, by the airlines.
HF radio is most commonly used for position reporting when you're going across the ocean airspace, which is devoid of radar. And ATC can't see you, so it's up to you to report your position and your altitude and your speed.
HF works great most of the time, except during a big flare. And during a big flare, that HF communication capability could be gone within a minute or two. So as soon as we see something happening in there, or we see a flare, it's one of the first things we do is alert the aviation community, hey, big flare, HF's going to be impacted.
Once we know that there's an event going on, then the aviation industry and the airlines can react to that. They can alter their routes over the poles. They can lower the altitudes that they're flying at, or maybe decide not to fly at all in the interest of the passenger safety.
So that's just one example of how HF is used, but the emergency response community will use it a lot too. It's one of their primary backups.
When you've lost connectivity between certain government agencies, it gives you that long-range coverage to talk from out of state to federal governments or from the FEMA locations to the state emergency operations centers.
So if you've got a big hurricane impact in the coastline, whatever big city, we've got the cell towers down and whatnot, we've got emergency communication folks in there. Those folks are very familiar with space weather and how it impacts their systems.
Here in recent years, it was used during Katrina when we had a lot of communications outages down there. It was also used during Hurricane Ike. There was an outage of the telephone circuits with the Texas State Emergency Office, so it was used in both of those situations.
So when we talk about backup, especially for the airlines, typically they'll have SATCOM, so it'll be satellite communication.
The satellite technology that emergency responders use could be GPSs, could be satellite phones, satellite data terminals.
Space weather events can impact SATCOMs. The impact can range from a nuisance to loss of a spacecraft. So we will give them the heads up. If we have space weather events, flares, whatnot, they need to know what's impacting their systems. Situational awareness is key. Time is of essence to these folks. Again, it's life and death.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Today's sea ice analysis. Not a lot changed from yesterday. Still now well north of St. Matthew Island. Heavier ice east of St. Lawrence Island, off to the southeast and eastward, with that area remaining pretty solid there, or fast in western Norton Sound. Coastal water forecast for the southern panhandle. West winds 20 knots tomorrow, seas at about 6 feet. Small craft advisories for the north coast. Southeast winds 25 knots, 7-foot seas. And the inside waters for Lynn Canal, south at 20, seas 4 feet. Southeast 20 for Stevens Passage with 4-foot seas. And Clarence Strait south at 15. Outlook for Wednesday, light variable winds, central and southern inside waters with slight seas, south 15 in the afternoon for Lynn Canal with 3-foot seas. Northwest 20 knots continue on the central and south coast of the Panhandle with seas running just under 8 feet. For the north coast, though, you've got small craft advisories due to 8-foot seas, but the winds will only be 10 to 15 knots out of the west-northwest. Prince William Sound, northeast 15, 3-foot seas tomorrow. And the eastern North Gulf Coast, around Middleton Island, southeasterlies at 20 knots, 6-foot seas. Western areas, western North Gulf Coast, east at 15. And then the Barren Islands, westerlies at 20 knots, with seas at 7 feet. Light winds for Kamishak Bay out of the west. And Cook Inlet, northeast, 15, 3-foot seas. Those will swing around to the south at 15 knots for Cook Inlet on Wednesday, with seas still running at right around 3 feet. Kamishak Bay, southeast at 20. And south 20 also for the Barren Islands and the North Gulf Coast, light southerlies at 10 to 15 knots with 5 to 6-foot seas. Prince William Sound, south winds 10 knots with seas running at about 2 feet. Kodiak Island, small craft advisories on the west or the east side there for southwest winds at 25 knots, 9-foot seas. Shelikof Strait westerlies at 20 with 4-foot seas. Small craft advisories Sitkinak to Cape Sarachev. There on the south side of the peninsula for west-southwest winds 25 knots and seas as high as 13 feet. Bering Sea side southwest 20, but for Bristol Bay westerlies at 25. Those are turning southeast at 25 for Bristol Bay on Wednesday with 6-foot seas. The Alaska Peninsula small craft advisories south to southeast 30 knots, 7 to 13-foot seas. Small craft advisories Castle Cape to Sitkinak for south winds at 25. Otherwise, Kodiak Island, waters around the area there will be south at 20. Fox Islands, south to southwest, 30 knots, specifically for Unalaska Island, 9 to 15-foot seas. Umak Island, late in the afternoon, edging, looks like gale force southerlies at 35 knots with 10 to 13-foot seas coming in toward Nikolsky in the afternoon. Gales for the central Aleutians all day long, south to southeast, 35 to 40 knots, and then east winds on average, or northeast Kiska to Shimei at 30 knots, Kiska to Amchitka southeast at 30. And for the next day, Shimei to Kiska northwest 30 knots, Amchitka to Adak 15 knots, central Aleutians southerlies 25 to 30 knots, and 30 to 35 knot winds for the eastern Aleutians. For the Pribilof tomorrow, southeast at 15, 8-foot seas, and northeast at 15, 7-foot seas, St. Matthew Island. Small craft advisories for the winds at 25 knots from the north, St. Lawrence Island. Light west winds 10 to 15 along the southwest coast. Those will pick up 30 knots there over the Pribilofs from the southeast and the Kuskokwim Delta coast, and east winds 30 knots for the Yukon Delta coast, St. Matthew Island, northeast 25 for St. Lawrence Island. Much lighter winds in Norton Sound, only at about 10 knots. For the central, or for the entire Beaufort Sea coast from Cape Thompson all the way over to Demarcation Point, east winds tomorrow 15 to 20 knots. Open water areas on the west side, seas 4 to 5 feet, 15 knot winds from Wales to Cape Thompson. And for Wednesday, west 20, Wales to Cape Thompson. Otherwise, easterlies continue for the Beaufort Sea coast at 15 to 20 knots. Tonight again, fog, low clouds, maybe a few flurries, North Slope Arctic coast. No change over the interior, a little breezy, especially on the east side, but nothing strong. And showers and rain increase. Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound into the Panhandle, and decrease for Kodiak Island. Next system bringing wind and rain into the western Aleutians, spreading eastward tomorrow. Mostly cloudy and showery southern Alaska into the Panhandle. Showers Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula, and central northern interior dry with low clouds and fog in the Arctic coast. Next front brings rain into the southwest coast on Wednesday.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.